those items in the pouch in front of you.
Have a safe and informative journey.
Hello, I'm Nathan Hartman, and this is Dreamfinders, a podcast about the creative culture of Disney theme parks. Sean Rozelle isn't trying to be like every other vlogger who loves Disney, and in fact, after moving away from Orlando, he knew his channel couldn't just be park visits like so many others. These days, it's a mix of short films, Disney opinions, thoughts on life, and his unique perspective as being a black vlogger who began his YouTube journey in a theme park culture that is predominantly white. Sean sat down with me to chat about being a shy guy who has found himself not only on the theater stage, but in the wrestling ring, how he found his voice as a vlogger, and his thoughts on Disney's relationship with black culture. All that and more is coming right up on Dreamfinders. Sean Rozelle, thanks so much for coming on Dreamfinders. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
So let's start a little bit with your background. While you might be sort of known by people who follow you on YouTube and stuff as an East Coast guy, you actually grew up in California, right?
Victorville, California, actually. So, so it was kind of a small town. It's in a high desert. So I would say for a good majority of my life, it was just all in the West Coast. So if I'm going to any sort of like park or anything like that, it was a lot of Disney. Well, not really. I say not really because I didn't really go to Disney a lot growing up. So there was a lot of Magic Mountain. There was a lot of like Knott's going on, but there was a lot of Magic Mountain. And so, I think it was probably maybe 19, 20 years old that it's like, Disney's cool. And then you're going to Disney all the time, but not still all the time, because again, Victorville is like a good hour and a half away. So, and then that's a lot of traffic because people be like, oh, I-4. But if you know about anything about the traffic in California, especially getting into Anaheim and stuff like that, it can get brutal. So that's one of those big things, right? So, it's definitely from the West Coast moving to Vegas, and that's where I spent another 8 years, and then moved to Orlando in 2017.
Now, growing up, you just so people know, and if they follow you, they do, you act, you've done stand-up, and YouTube, of course, is also rather performative. Were you always an outgoing kid? Was that always, were you the ham of the family?
No. No, actually, I would say I was kind of I'm very shy, and I think that's kind of one of the things that a lot of people don't really see a lot is that I like being on stage and doing a theater thing and very performative, but not the ham, that you may think I am, you know what I mean? So I'm very low key a lot until people, go, oh, hey, Sean. And then it's turn it on. But if it's just me just at home or me just kind of out and about, it's kind of very introverted rather than extroverted at times, It's kind of a switch, I think, you know what I mean? So it depends. It really depends. But as far as the family thing goes, wasn't oh, Sean keeps doing this, and it's nah, that's not really me.
Did you perform at a young age, or was this something that you wanted to do later on?
I didn't really get into any acting until 19, and that's when I did my first acting gig, which was in a student film called Love, Kevin in Victorville, a movie that you'll probably never find anywhere on the internet, not on Netflix or anything like that. It was just a little student film, but from there it was oh, okay, this is fun, and then got involved with more acting stuff, and then more theater stuff came from there. And then I think around that same time, I got involved with like pro wrestling, and then I started doing that a lot. And then when that was over, I went back to theater. So it was a lot.
Mm.
And then especially like going back and then going to Vegas, then it was like doing improv. So that was another like piece of the puzzle that did a lot of improv. And then, doing a lot of theater, a lot of improv at the same time, and then bringing all those skills, with me everywhere I go. So,
Well, tell me about that wrestling. Like, how long were you sort of working? Were you actually wrestling, or were you doing something associated with it, or what was your hope for that like performative aspect of your career?
So let's see, that was in 2005. And it went pretty quick. It was a lot of fun. So I trained with Matt and Nick Jackson, the Young Bucks, who actually are running AEW. They're the the EVPs that you want to call it. So they're the ones who are like the big face of AEW. And then I started with them, and they trained me, and that was probably a good like 3 years of my life, from about 2008. And then that was a blast, dude. That was a lot of fun. It's a crazy community, if anything, if you want to call it that. But I had a blast. So that was a lot of fun. That was a lot of learning. But yeah, that was a good time.
What is something you took from your wrestling training that you feel, because I feel a very physical, clearly it's a very physical kind of performative thing. And what I think is interesting is like, there's a lot inside of theater acting that is dealing in the physical, but it's more like how you do subtle things and internal things. Was there anything that you took from wrestling that you were able to sort of apply to your other sort of acting gigs or performances and that sort of stuff? It's a different genre, it's a different thing, but it feels like there's some sort of cohesion there.
It's not anything that I took from it. If anything, it should be vice versa. That I should have took from theater to wrestling, because see, by the time I got into it, you don't really like think about it as a whole, and it really does kind of mess with your brain a bit, especially like when you're in it, because as much of it is a performance art, you view it kind of differently, and even though you grow up and you go, this is performance, this is a performance, this is performance, in the back of your brain you're like, still kind of a sport, right?
Sure.
That's why they call it sports entertainment. So what happens is that when you're in it, you're just like, I should be better than everybody, right? And so you really gets into your head, as far as like how good you can be or how good you should be. And so but what you don't realize is that and I'll take like theater for example. Like if you go and see a theater show, the one thing that I love about theater is that there is no such thing as a lead. And I think that's kind of like the most important piece of the puzzle, is that a lot of people go, oh, I get to be the lead. But are you?
Right.
Because I don't think that exists anymore as far as like, theater goes, because everybody plays an important role, not just one person.
Right.
So, especially when it comes to a play or a musical, not one person it can handle the weight of the entire play. That's why it's hard to be like, oh, you got the lead role. So say, for example, like a play like Hamilton, which I love, you can land Alexander Hamilton, but, and even though the title of the play is called Hamilton,
right,
but would he really truly be the lead? Because a lot of people will be like, well, Burr kind of isn't a very important character, which is true. Or you got somebody like Thomas Jefferson, which is a very important role. And then Lafayette is in a very important role. And then George Washington is a very important role. Or Eliza, and then you see all these other little different roles that are very important. to the play in order for the story to move forward.
Yeah.
It's not just one man, it's the entire story. So when you think about wrestling, it's like the entire show is a story. Now let's move that story forward. Not just one person hinges on it, not one person drives that story. It's the entire story.
Yeah.
So you're looking at it as a group of people trying to push this tale. And that's kind of the most important thing that, like, you know, for me, I had to learn like past tense and go, oh wow, that applies here, rather than like, you know, like you kind of have like this idea of yourself rather than saying I can just drive the entire whole of the story this way further, you know.
Yeah. Was there friction for you, because it seems like, and I could be wrong on the timeline here, but from going from something like wrestling to improv, and improv especially is something where it is about a unit finding a way. Was that a hard transition for you, or were you able to sort of separate things out in your head?
No, you can separate it out in your head, and I think like at that point, you know, when you are doing improv, that's kind of the main goal. Is, you know, working as a team, and not just working as a team, but sometimes, you know, you have to kind of play around with the idea that somebody else is throwing out.
Yeah.
And even though you may not really like the idea, you have to kind of go along with it, because maybe the idea is a little like, I don't really like this, but what can I make out of this? And then playing around with that idea and making that idea work, you know. And then sometimes you have people who are on the same wavelengths of how you think, and then you can make magic from it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So
you mentioned, going back a little bit and talking about growing up, you mentioned, of course, going to Magic Mountain and going to, going to, you know, different areas, just not going to Disney, going to Knott's and different places like that. From what I've sort of, you've just kind of talked about in your vlog, you had sort of a similar Disney upbringing as I sort of did. It was not a yearly thing. It was like maybe every 5 years, you know, that sort of thing. Did you sort of, did going less and having it be a less tangible place, especially kind of pre-YouTube when you could watch rides when you wanted to or whatever, did it make it sort of a more magical place for you? Because that was sort of my experience.
With that, it's weird. I don't know if I use the word magical, but I think the hype, you know, like leading up to it was always like sky high getting there and planning out what you're going to do and everything, because it was so like an intangible piece to go. You're just like, can't wait to go until then I get there. Then it's just like, yeah, okay, I'm here. You know,
right? You're in the place that you're at. Yeah.
So it's I think the magical part is the anticipation, not so much of like, I mean, being there is cool, but I've always, you know, enjoyed like, I can't wait to get there, and you get like really hyped. You get that like hype and the butterflies, and you know, and you wake up super early to go, and then you're there before the park opens, and you rope drop, you know. So that part I really enjoyed, especially if it's like, okay, you don't go for a while, and then, you know, because you know, Disney burnout is real.
Sure.
And I really stand by that. And like Disneyland was an easy part to get burnt out of quickly, because, you know, we don't have like 4 parks. They only have 2. So, and it's 2 that you can literally do in a day. So, you know, if you don't have an agenda, you know, and you're just there just to be there, you can get burned out very quickly. You're like, nope, I'm just not going to go for maybe an entire year. And then you wait the entire year out, and then you're like, okay, now I can go. And then it's cool, you know, and it's fresh again. So,
do you remember your first Disney park experience?
I don't. It's not just remembering it. I think I have it on tape, but I think it's like one of the ones that I remember distinctly. And this one was on, like, I actually recorded it and just kind of edited it up into like a smaller like park tour. This was in 1991, so I was 10, and you can actually see it on one of my older videos. I think it's Negro Orlando 50. It was my 50th vlog, and I thought it was so cool to be like, I'll show you this old video I made like in 1991 when I was 10. You know what I mean? It's like I've been vlogging since 1991, and it's an old trip to Disneyland. No, I wasn't with a camera at the time. My uncle had the camera, but you can see Disneyland from 91 and see, seeing, oh, what's there? What's changed? Like they had a really cool thing by It's a Small World where like they didn't build out Toontown yet. So what they did was that they did like a Disney afternoon area where they had like a ball pit and like all these other little fun things that was based on like the cartoons of the Disney afternoon series, like DuckTales and Tailspin and Gummy Bears and stuff like that. So that's pretty cool just to be able to have that on tape. So that's like one memory, and there's like several in there, but that was like one of my first ones that I can distinctly remember.
Yeah, God bless uncles and dads and people who carried around massive cameras in the 90s to capture these things, because it's wild. Like we had one that was like, you put the VHS tape inside and just recorded right on it, and it's crazy,
and it was like right over the shoulder, so it looked like you're like, like carrying a boombox. So I'm just like, wow, to think about like I'm carrying this small camera in my hand, to record myself, but he had one that went over his shoulder, and he had the eyepiece, you know what I mean, to like film.
Yeah, totally.
Periodically, like that was a lot.
Let me ask you about your actual vlogging opposed to your childhood vlogging days, I guess. Early 2017, you start vlogging on YouTube, and you've mentioned that you sort of started vlogging because of your intense hatred of Facebook. Explain. Explain that a little bit. Explain why Facebook made you want to do YouTube.
Yeah, man. I like how it came full circle though when I think about it. I just hate it, and I think I hate it. I still kind of hate Facebook for the same reasons. Is I hated the fact that it's like I think around that same time I was going through a lot of different stuff, and then you'll write this huge long post on Facebook, right? And you would want someone to hear you, and that's kind of why I say everything comes full circle. It makes sense. Is that you want people to hear you, so you kind of throw out like a post of like da 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 da. This is how I'm feeling, and you're just pouring your heart out on Facebook, and nobody would respond, and people would just hit a like, and that was like my overall feeling, is that like I had like so much to say, and I was moving, and I was leaving Vegas, and I'm just like, this is how I feel, and just detailed like everything I thought and just laid it all out. And then it was just like, thumbs up, what a like. And so from there, I was like, I don't think anybody cares what I'm writing. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so you kind of get like, it's like, why report this out? But people are seeing it. People are responding. So I'm going to try something different. And so when I moved to Orlando, I was just like, I'm going to try to do YouTube. You know what I mean? It's like, I want people to kind of see, because you're moving away from your friends and your family. So it's just like, I'm going to record things. And this is what it looks like at its core, is that I'm going to record things and I want to document things so that way I can look back on it and go, oh, cool. And that's kind of how a lot of people start that way. They're like, I just want to record things. I can have a diary that I can look back on. For me, it was something a little different. Like I can record it, and then my friends and family can see what I'm doing. I don't have to post anything. I don't have to be on Facebook posting about what I did today. You can literally watch it. And that's kind of like the whole thought process. And if you're going to like something, and sure, that's a thumbs up. You can give me a like. It's a little bit of a monetary return that I was already getting on Facebook, but now it's like I can receive it on YouTube and then get that return much quicker, because I could say thanks to the camera. And if you're watching it, then maybe you'll return with a thumbs up. Cool. If you're going to like it, fine. That helps me out in the long run. But I got a view out of it and I got a thumbs up out of it. So it was a better way. But I think at its core, for me, it would always resulted in doing something of that magnitude of like, hey, I'm doing something that I want people to watch, because I'm not around the people that I grew up with, so.
A way to connect.
Yeah.
You do mention, and I think this is sort of a theme through several of your vlogs, your sort of struggle to find your voice, to go from inspirations that you had, and sort of finding who you were as a vlogger. Is that still a journey for you?
It's funny. I think there is like versions that many people go through, and then it's just a continuation of an evolution. And that's something I kind of thought about a lot today. Especially because like today it was like, oh, you hit 4,000 subscribers, and I'm not proud of it. Well, let me go back. I am proud of it. It's just one of those things. It's like, and I think there was a lot of different versions of what I gone through in order to kind of get there. So I feel like, much like everyone else, who begins their vlog, it's a very homage-ish to whoever they watched. And I think that's kind of like the big thing, is that like, if you're a big fan of like Tim Tracker, your vlogs are going to look like Tim's or Adam's or, whoever you watch, Justice Guard, that would be very carbon copied of it. Then eventually somewhere on the line, you decide that you want to change up because, the train can only go so far. So you want to, change. So like for me, there was a lot of different evolutions to that channel, and I think in the most part, starting like the Negro Orlando channel, because that's what it was originally, was I really wanted to showcase theme parks and really wanted to be a part of the theme park community. And so, all I wanted to do was, showcase like theme parks from like a black man's point of view. So it was a much different channel, when I started, and, I evolved just a little bit more just to be a little bit more family friendly and, really hit the theme parks hard. And then at one point it was just like, I want to get more into like the traveling piece and started traveling and then learning more stuff about that. But I never really like got away from theme parks. And then at one point it felt like it was just too much. You know what I mean? It was just like you're a voice in a sea of similar voices, and it's kind of hard to stand out when people are very similar. You know what I mean? So it's very difficult, for every one vlogger that's standing out, there's, like one will start their journey today, and then like, and then you do it for like a couple months and you go, oh wow, there's so much more other people that are so much higher, so you're trying to like keep above that water and keep above float and get air. And then for many people, they quit. And then, but for me, I was like, this is where I try to change something a little bit differently. So um, that's when like a lot of the sketches came into play, and I wanted to make a lot of mini movies and try to push what I can do, uh, camera wise, story wise, where it was like I want to, see how creative I can be, see how creative I can edit, see how creative I can be, with stories and everything else. And then at a certain point, you're just like, okay, that's great, but you're fixing for a theme park,
Right.
like you feel like you've already like made your bed in that community, so you got to go back to it. So you go back to that well, and then again, it's frustrating because you're just another voice in that sea. And I think right now it's another version of me, because I felt like right now, like I moved away. I'm in Alabama now, and I'm not in Orlando, so I felt like it was inappropriate. Not saying that the Negro Orlando name was inappropriate. Like that was me 100%, and loved it. Love having that as a name. Like I embrace Negro Orlando. But the thing is, like, I'm not in Orlando. I don't anticipate living back in Orlando. So by dropping that name, it kind of gave me a little bit more freedom. It's like, okay, now that you don't have Orlando, what do you want to do? And now it's like another version where it's like, okay, I can continue to, do sketches, and I can do more of what I want to do, and I can educate. I don't have to be tied to theme parks. So it was kind of like the death of a theme park channel. And in some ways, I would still like to go back to do theme parks once in a while, but to be like, whereas like Negro Orlando was heavy into theme parks, and that was where the money is, and then being like, okay, well, here's another evolution and another facet to what I can do, just a different side. And like, this is what I can do more of, you know what I mean? Rather than be like, hey, here's more theme park stuff. It's like, okay, here's more education stuff that I can throw in. Or if I want to do more sketches and comedy, I can do that. You know, I don't feel like, it's basically a channel that hasn't been tied to any sort of genre. But I think that's kind of also another rant of mine, since I'm kind of taking over this podcast anyway, just on soapboxes of many kinds. Just,
I mean, it's your episode, so you can soapbox all you want.
Because it's just, like for me, I've always been against the idea of genres, and people go, genres is like that thing that, that propels you, and you got to stick to it when it comes to like YouTube. And it's like, oh, you got to have a specific genre. You have to have a specific niche, but I don't really believe in that, because everybody has, different interests and different tastes, and then you grow out of that taste. So what do you do if you grow out of that taste? Do you delete your channel? You know what I mean? It's like explore more and do more. You're not tied to just doing X. You don't have to stay in this niche. You don't have to stay in this genre. You can do more. And for me, I think I get bored easy. So I'm like, okay, I can keep doing this and keep doing this, but eventually I'm going to change and evolve and do something else, So
what do you feel like the process has been for you when it comes to so transitioning? For those who have not seen your work, like, you're right, a lot of the early stuff is, I would call, like, in theme park sort of walks and things of that nature, and now you find yourself in many ways sort of contemplating sometimes the role Disney has played in all sorts of cultural ways, and you can kind of take the nerd out of Disney or Orlando, but you can't sometimes take the Disney out of the nerd. So like, it still crops up quite a bit in your channel and sort of what you're thinking about. And I think what is sort of interesting is something you brought up with genre, because something you said on your channel is that you sort of felt like the channel, when it's just a theme park channel, it's sort of selling time at a theme park opposed to it being about you. Do you find now, as you sort of transitioned into this next phase for your channel, have you found that vulnerability of being it, like, I'm not selling, time at a theme park, I'm selling myself. Is that vulnerability easy for you, or is that extremely difficult?
It's a little bit of both.
Hmm.
I find it very vulnerable. Like for me, it's kind of like opening your mind. I think with theme parks, it's very easy because with theme parks, you can literally build a wall between you and who you
Hmm.
are. And I think and a lot of people do that, and it's a wall between, what you think people are there for and in yourself, and they don't have to see you for you. It's a very easy way to hide without hiding, because, there's a lot of stuff about people's favorite creators they don't know.
Yeah.
Um, and you might be able to attest to that. And, that if I can show you the theme park, then you're going to watch for the theme park. But for the creator, I can hide in plain sight. I don't have to tell you my views. I don't have to tell you like what I think or what I know or my life,
Mhm.
like you are going to assume, but you don't really truly know. So I'm not going to show you that. And so it's easy to hide. In this sort of situation, it's going deeper into like what I feel motivates me and inspires me, but at the same time, it also kind of leaves me exposed because now I'm talking about things that I might find emotionally like driven.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? So if I'm talking about, you know, how I feel about coming home at work, because of, the death of George Floyd and stuff like that, that's a very real piece, that a lot of people don't want to open their hearts to. Or when I talk about like my overall feelings about Disney vlogging and diversity, like that's also exposing how I feel in a community where it's easy to hide, you know what I mean, about how you feel. And it's like, it's one of those taboo things to talk about. And it's like, well, I'm going to talk about it and I'm going to expose how I feel and I want people to see it. So, it's, it's easier to talk about it. Like, I think it's easier to, once you get exposed to it and you're able to open yourself up to your audience, it becomes easier, but it's easier to hide when the backdrop is Disney.
Sure.
Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
totally.
I don't know if I answered
No,
that question.
absolutely. No, for sure. What I think is something that is sort of kind of connected to this, though, is like there are certain things that you can't hide. And that, of course, would be like you're a black man vlogging about Disney. And where I think a lot of people want to categorize vloggers, right? Like, these are my favorite Universal Studios vloggers, and these are my favorite wrestling vloggers, and these are my favorite, right? People might not say, like, here are my favorite white vloggers, but they will define a certain group, right? They'll say, these are my favorite vloggers of color. Is that categorization something that you see as harmful, or does it give you a unique platform?
For telling people about vloggers of color?
Yeah, I mean, just in general, like, I feel like, as I would imagine there would be some frustration to feel like, okay, I have this platform, YouTube, and it goes out to the world and anyone can see it, and like something happens, right? Whether it's a police brutality or something of that nature, like people sort of turn their heads to certain people, right? And go like, well, what do you think? Right. I mean, that's what they do. Do you feel that pressure as a black man who has a platform to talk about these things every time? Or do you feel like, sometimes that's not what my channel is going to be about? And you've been very open about your,
it's weird.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, it's weird to answer that question because I think it's kind of it's kind of one of those like situations that it's temporary,
Hmm.
and that's kind of where I kind of sit. Um, the best example would be, when I was doing theme parks, you you become aware that you might be the only one.
Hmm.
And I think that kind of really set with me. I would say probably like the tail end of my first year that I was just like, "Ooh, this is weird." You know what I
Right.
mean? And then you feel like I might be the only one doing this, and then you maybe learn that there's like two other black vloggers, and you're like, "Okay, so this is a little strange." Um, where there is three black vloggers, and so you kind of start to wonder, it's like, do people watch black vloggers to get a sense of Disney through their eyes, or because they can't relate, they don't want to see?
Hmm.
So they, and so that kind of drives you to be a little more paranoid about like what you're actually doing. And so that's kind of like been always my feeling
Hmm.
about it. But I'm going to I'm going to tie all of this in here very soon. It's just knowing that, well, if I'm a black guy at Disney and I'm doing Disney content, is the regular white family watching me because I don't fit, what their family looks like?
Hmm.
So I can possibly like tell them or show them like things that they're going to enjoy and like, because I'm not that family,
Right.
so they're going to watch Tim, and they're going to watch Adam, and they're going to watch, Paging Miss Morrow, like when Nate and Veronica were still together. They're going to watch the WDW couple because those are the people that they can relate to,
Hmm.
being a white family planning for Disney. I'm going to watch and relate to these people because I relate to them. I don't relate to Negro Orlando. I don't relate to Prince Charming Dev. I don't relate to This Life of Ours, So it makes that conversation much more difficult. Fast forward until now, and here we are, where there's a lot of gains and a lot of push for equality and for, the Black Lives Matter movement, but there's a bigger, strong case of equality and making sure that blacks are heard and blacks are needed. And so now you're sitting here and people are like, well, what do we do, to prevent this, to stop this, to, make people feel equal? And for me, it's like, the answer's been there all along. It's always been there, but people saw it and then ignored it, or people just,
Right.
kind of went along their way. And so it's good to try to educate the best I can. And I feel like this time, rather than last time and the time before that, I feel that finally people are starting to listen, which makes me feel good. Makes me feel valuable because a lot of people weren't listening before. Now you're kind of given a situation where people are like, how do you stop it? It's like, cool. Like, we all need to want to be feeling like we're on an equal platform. And here we are, like, demanding an equal platform in some form of way. It's like, and it hasn't been for a very long time. And now people are like, I'm listening and I'm paying attention. So I think it's all kind of come full circle in a way, where, starting off and feeling like I didn't have much of a voice. Now I have a much bigger voice in the said community, but it took a while to get there.
You mentioned in a video some data from Streetlight Data. This is from 2018, and the information shows that sort of the demographics.
Oh, from the Disney, that was the Disney vlogging.
Yeah,
and diversity video. Yeah.
And you sort of showcase that the demographics of guests at Walt Disney World are like 80% white and like 10% black.
Yeah.
Why do you think, and of course, I don't expect you to like have a concrete answer. You're not a demographic studies person necessarily, but from your personal experience, why do you think that number is so low? Why do you think black people are not attracted, or black culture is not as attracted to going to the parks? Is it just is it culturally? Is it economic? Is it just shifts in where people live? Like, why do you think that number is so low?
Oh, that's a great question. I can only give you my experience, and it hits on all three. Culturally, it wasn't a thing. And for many black families, it's not. Growing up, we weren't a Disney family. We weren't. I didn't own a lot of Disney cartoons. I didn't watch a lot of Disney cartoons. My parents didn't really watch a lot of Disney cartoons. We didn't grow up watching a lot of Disney cartoons. My dad watched a lot of horror movies, so that was kind of the thing. It just wasn't our thing. It just wasn't something that like we pushed.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So, and it can just be a lot of different reasons, but it just wasn't that thing that was the in, for everybody. It's good to, like when you're saying, oh, well, like what's your best Disney memory? And I can go, okay, I was a 10 at Disney, but I don't have any pictures of like meeting Mickey. I don't have any, sentimental memories of meeting Mickey at a park. I don't have like Mickey holding me as a baby. I don't have those photos because that never happened. So, if I go to Disney, I see a meet and greet. I'm not like, oh, I can't wait to meet, this character. Just like, okay, cool.
You have
never
you
was
have no nostalgia for that aspect of what.
As far as any nostalgia goes, zero. It's all like I would say there's like one bit of nostalgia I have for Disney parks, and that's Haunted Mansion. And Haunted Mansion has like a little place in my heart for it. But everything else is like, just don't care, right? There's just it just wasn't a thing. It just wasn't a thing that we grew up in. Now, when you talk about like economically, that's also not a thing, because we're, average, white families could go every year. I never went every year. I went every year, like when I got older and I was able to have the funds to do it, but it wasn't a thing growing up to go every year. I'll say we went every 5 years. So say the next time that I would have gone to Disney was when I was 15. And then maybe again when I was like 17, but for like my high school,
right?
Like the day before you graduate, then they go senior. Senior go to Disneyland. I don't know what they call it. But it wasn't that thing that we had to do. It was like a very special thing to do, but it wasn't a thing that like you grow up going, oh, I can't wait till next year and go to Disneyland. It just wasn't a thing that we promoted around. So especially on like a lot of black, homes, just wasn't a thing. Just wasn't a thing that was like, it gets you hype. Of Mickey Mouse because of the cartoons, but that's all you do, so you're kind of cut off from it. So you kind of grow up and you're like, if I go, cool. But it was like not a thing. Whereas, you have the cheaper route of Magic Mountain, which was like maybe a third of the price of what Disneyland would be. If Disneyland's ticket price was like $80, you can go to Magic Mountain for like 30.
Yeah.
So you know, there may be more of a value for that family to go to Magic Mountain and to go to Knott's than to go to Disney,
Yeah.
you know.
As someone who has spent a lot of time in the parks, though, now you've had, a lot more experiences. One thing that I've been fortunate in the last couple of weeks to do is listen to people of color talk to me about just their experiences of prejudice in the parks. Things that I wouldn't have even thought, right? Being uncomfortable at the Grand Floridian. Just not something that I had ever considered. Have you felt those moments, whether it's actual prejudice from somebody or just cultural kind of prejudice because of how something has been created? Have those moments like hit you at times?
That sounds like you were talking to Nate.
Yeah. Definitely talk to Nate.
No, I would say it's never in your face. And I think that's kind of like the most important piece of it, is that when anybody talks about like certain prejudices in areas, it's never like directly in your face. It's not like, hey, I'm going to be like deliberately racist in your face, but you do feel like you shouldn't be there. It's almost like how people describe being inside of a haunted house, like a legit haunted house, and you kind of have that feeling like, ooh, like I should not be here at all. You know what I mean? And it's like an odd foreboding feeling. You know what I mean? And a lot of people get it, and a lot of people don't. But there are times like you'd walk to certain resorts, and you feel that maybe I shouldn't be here. You know what I mean? So it's nothing that like kind of gives it away, but people know. You know what I mean? So if you go to Grand Floridian, what does it look like?
Yeah.
You know, you walk in and it's, high class, it's white everywhere. There's a guy playing a piano in the center. There's a weird glass elevator. There is Victoria and Albert's. There is all these different like things there that I couldn't possibly afford, or maybe I can, but most people may see me and maybe I come in there and I got a t-shirt on, I got jeans, and my hair is in, like dreads and everything. And, you don't know, but the collective is like, what is he doing here? You know what I mean? And so you don't feel the eyes, but you feel the tension of maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I shouldn't be here. Maybe this isn't where I want to belong. This doesn't really feel welcoming. Like the cast members are going to make me feel welcome, but is everybody else? I mean, I'm not going to have money to go eat at Victoria and Albert's.
Right.
That's a nice restaurant. What is he doing skulking around here? Does he have money? And if he has money, how did he get all that money? You know what I mean? And so it's kind of like, it's an odd feeling. It's a strange feeling that for anyone to really completely understand, it's the way, like, how it's described, like going to a haunted house and you hear that voice that says, "Get out." You're like, oh, maybe I should stay. Like it's literally like that feeling. Grand Floridian is a great example. I mean, I pop in there from time to time, but that's not a resort that I am going to find myself always going. And I would skip purposefully for that very reason. So, for example, like, they built that new bar, that Beauty and the Beast bar, and then Like, even though I'm pretty sure I can go in there and get a drink, I didn't really feel like I fit in there. So I skip it and I'll leave to somewhere like, oh no, the Poly would probably be something that is more my feel, like it makes me feel welcome if I go to the Polynesian. Or, maybe the Contemporary, because Contemporary may make me feel a little bit more, okay, this is at ease. It's a little bit older. It's a little bit more, welcoming. But then you have the Grand Floridian, and then you have Coronado Springs, which, the very second I saw like a photo of that, I haven't stepped foot in that resort ever. I never went into it. Never went to go check it out. Like I've never seen it. And I think the first time I seen it from the outside, I was like, the hell is this? And I was really shocked by what the building was. And I was only told, oh, that's Coronado Springs. I was like, I never drove this way. Never seen it in my life. And mind you, I'd been going to Disney almost every day or so for 4 years. Never saw this resort. So, like certain things give you certain feelings on whether you want to stick around or not.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose like what I would say is when I look at like something like Grand Floridian, I would go, yeah, that's, but for a bunch of rich old people, like it's a high class joint, but I don't have this, I guess, and I'm guessing this is my white privilege. Like I don't have this sort of thought of like, well, maybe there's a class difference here, but I'm going to go get a drink. If, it's pretty, I'm going to go in, right? I don't feel that same thing. And so it's interesting that, do you feel like there is that connection between class expectations? Does that affect where you feel like you can go as a person of color at Disney?
I think so. I think there is a bit of a classism in every resort. And you feel that and you see it and is expected. And I think I made a comment, like, I think a couple of weeks ago, where I felt everyone at some point in time have referred to the All-Star resorts as ghetto. And I never forget that the fact that I only heard that term for those resorts is through YouTube, you know what I mean? So that's the only time I've ever really associated with it, because I never really stayed at any resorts until like maybe earlier this year.
Right.
Yeah, it was in March actually. And I never really stayed in any resorts. That was the first time I ever stayed on a Disney property. And I like those resorts. I like the All-Star resorts. But nobody would want to stay in because it's given this vibe. It's like, oh, well, people who can't afford the cool part about Disney, they stay at the All-Stars. People who can't afford the magic of Disney stay at those resorts.
Right.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So there is a bit of a class like expectation depending on who you are and where you go. It's like, and if that's the appearance of like, oh, the All-Star resorts, this, okay, then I guess I am that. And then you don't have a good time because, now you're looked down upon, from even traveling at those resorts. So, then now people want to chase it with the Joneses and be like, I got to stay at the Coronado. I got to stay at the Grand Floridian,
Let me ask you about the actual parks. Let me ask you about Magic Kingdom.
Yeah.
Frontierland, Liberty Square, Main Street USA, even Adventureland, in many ways. I've if you look at these lands, at the actual histories behind them, right? Not just the genre, but the histories, they are rife with racial oppression or colonialism. I mean, the actual frontier is built because of slavery. Can the genres of those lands, cowboys, adventurers, that sort of stuff, can that be separated from their roots historically and still be fun? Or have we reached a point in cultural consciousness where that's just not as possible as it once was?
I think it's already done that. I think a lot of it has already separated itself from the history. And I think that is by design. Is Disney has so many things that you can look at and think about the history of it, but it's already so far removed from the history of it that people go, oh, what? Like, that's a thing? You know, and so they're shocked when they hear the story behind it. And it happens every year. So, you know, it's, you know, find people who get shocked when they learn that, you know, when they go to Liberty Square, like right outside the Hall of Presidents, and they see that weird, like brown, like windy road of gravel. And they go, what is that supposed to signify? And then when you finally tell them, you know, like back in that day, they didn't have toilets or, you know, indoor plumbing. So they just took, the excrement and they just threw it out in the street, and it became kind of a river that flowed out to the river that you can literally walk to it. And then it ends, you know, maybe at, you know, where Mark Twain is or something. And they go, wait, what? That's a thing? And they're shocked because that's a part of history that, even though that's legitimate history, they managed to separate from. Or, you know, I think, you know, when I put up the Aunt Jemima video, you know, one of the things is that they had a Aunt Jemima at Disneyland. And a lot of people are like, well, Aunt Jemima was at Disneyland. What? Since when?
15 years.
And they were 15 years from 1955 of the park opening until 1970. And they were shocked that it was there, even though if you know your history, it would have, this was no secret, but they removed themselves so far away from it, you know? And so it's hard to go, oh, this is, you know, appropriation, but it's so far removed that it's like, as long as you know the history, it's good, but you also know that Disney's not going to budge on it. You know, I think that's kind of why the whole talk about Splash Mountain is like an odd conversation. And I think I've said it many times, is this like Splash Mountain by itself is so far removed from the context of what the stories were, is so far removed from Song of the South that they made sure that there is no link, that there is no visual link between, like, when you ride the ride, you are not going to think about Song of the South. There's no possible way. And in fact, there's nothing that mentions Song of the South anywhere. There's no mention of Remus. There's no mention of Joel Chandler Harris. There's no mention of Song of the South, except on the ceiling in the gift shop. But nobody's looking at the ceiling, and everybody's going to find that little book that says Song of the South on it. Nobody's going to look for it. You know what I mean? But there is one small thread that links it right back to Song of the South, that links it right back to the minstrel shows. And the thing, that one little thread is Zippity Doo Dah. And that thread is still hanging on. And they try to push that song so far away from the source material. They try to separate themselves from it, like, as hard as possible. And it goes right back to Song of the South, and the conversation starts all over again. You know, I mean, I don't think they're ever going to get rid of the song, and I don't think they're ever going to retheme the ride. But as long as people but the history is there, right. You know, they can't separate that too much. But I think by design, that's what they wanted to do, is make sure that nobody thought about Song of the South. Nobody went looking for it. So that's the thing, is that, like, for each and every single one of the lands, it's so far removed from anything that has to do with it. You know, New Orleans Square is separated from New Orleans, you know, and anything that may have gone on Louisiana or like maybe the slave trades and the plantations of Louisiana. Like they make you not even think about that stuff, even though you know the history. A lot of people may not, if, especially you're going to, Port Riverside or anything like that. Like you're not thinking about the history, or maybe some people do, but they try to remove all that history away from it so that way people don't think about it.
Yeah.
Is
that okay? Or because and you're right about, like, Splash Mountain is now becoming like a conversational point, and I'm hearing different experiences from different people of color. Some people are like, that doesn't bother me at all. Like, I love that ride. It's my favorite ride. And other people are like, it's super offensive to me. Is that just always going to be a thing? Like, or do you take a theme park for what it is and its history and what it's trying to do and kind of go, well, it's a theme park? Or do they have an obligation to sort of not hide from the source material?
I think that becomes a very odd, it becomes a very slippery slope. And I think, like, for Disney, it can become a big, like, because I think what Disney wanted to achieve was a fairy tale Americana. And I think that's kind of like really like the best thing to really say. It's like, this is what they want to achieve, where its history is absolved and it doesn't exist, as far as like going into like certain areas and everything. So for them to address it and address anything else like that, then that makes them have to also address the fact that maybe their world isn't as fantasy as they had intended. So they don't want to have to address that because, this is a fantasy Americana. You know what I mean? It's Americana in where you told a story, like this is a stage, but if you told a story that says, hey, I'm in Liberty Square where finally we were all accepted as one, then you know what? That's the story. Again, you're on stage. It's a play. Right. It's a show. And you wrote the story. So to address it, it says, well, this is a little bit like real life. So I guess we have to address that.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's like Disney's goal. But I think it's not Disney that should have to educate. I think it's the education on the person who experiences it. So if they go to Disney, then they have to be like, okay, I understand the history behind it, and you can choose how you feel about that. But I think the idea is knowing the history behind it. Will you understand the history of Peter Pan when you ride Peter Pan's Flight and then you see that little, scene with the Native Americans? Do you understand the history behind that, or why it's offensive? Are you offended on that ride? Is anybody offended on that ride? Or is it a part of that fantasy that Disney like sprinkled on and allowed you to have? You know what I'm saying? So it's those, like, it's a fantasy that I don't think Disney should address. But I also think like it's the guest's due diligence to understand the history of it, understand it, and do what they want to do with that particular area. I mean, like Epcot is probably like the one bit where a lot of people go, and some people feel a certain way about certain pavilions, and some people feel different.
Right.
They escape from it, but maybe you're giving a skewered type of viewpoint of person's cultures. You know what I mean? Like you go to UK pavilion and like the UK pavilions like look like is all UK like this, where I can go into a store and just buy Doctor Who stuff,
I can attest you cannot. Sort of it's not possible. Yeah.
Right. But it's fantasy too. You know what I mean? Like, and that's like the big thing. And that's why it's kind of hard to be like, hey, retheme Splash Mountain. Knowing the history, yes, but they also are like, we're going to separate the history from this ride as hard as we can. And if given the chance, they'll continue to push that history away until eventually nobody remembers Song of the South. And that's what they want. They want those people who go to Disney for the first time and they ride Splash Mountain and go, wow, that was really fun. And those Brer characters, they must be original characters too. And they go, yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what they wanted. That was by design.
What about the times that Disney does not allow necessarily for history to be pushed back? I think of Hall of Presidents. I think of American Adventure. When Disney does stuff like that, when they are literally going, come and watch this show, we are going to teach you history. Is that something? I can't think of any other theme park in the world that does this. It's only Disney that seems to feel like they should teach swaths of American history. Is that something that they should be doing? Is that a role a theme park plays?
No, I don't think they should teach. I mean, but I don't think. For Disney to teach it, that's a rough question. Because for them to teach like history and teach every little thing about history, then they kind of implicate themselves. So I think in a video I talked about Mickey's white gloves and how those white gloves were essentially a play on minstrel shows, because Mickey's did Steamboat Willie with no gloves, and he's drawn in mini cartoons with no gloves. Then he did Mickey's Melodrama, and now he's got gloves. So that's not something that they're going to bring up. Be like, oh, well, Mickey wears gloves because of minstrel shows. Okay, let's tell that to kids.
Yeah.
Because now you just opened up a can of worms. So for them to be like, let's teach the history of Native Americans and everything like that, that now you have to expose the fantasy for being reality. And that isn't the goal, So even though it's important to teach it, that's not their responsibility. And that's kind of the key, I think it's our responsibility to teach that history and be like, oh, well, there's this, that, at one point when you were writing on Mark Twain, they had live Native Americans that, that were on the sides, portraying this, they weren't robots, they were real people at one point. There's a Native American statue right there in Main Street in Disneyland. There is so many different things that you can just point out and be like, look at that. There's some history and it's maybe racially insensitive, but in their fantasy world, it can mean something different, It can mean something entirely different. So that's a very hard conversation. I don't think them as a company, they're going to ever address it because it's a fantasy world. And I think that's like the one piece that's like important. It's fantasy, rather than saying, you know what, I'm going to do my due diligence in explaining and teaching that. So that way people know, and don't let this corporation erase that history of what they're trying to do and push that history away from your mind.
Beyond just, of course, while we're having this conversation, Disney has done some funding for, I suppose it's their way of sort of showing sort of racial reconciliation or exploring that as a company. They are making statements and things like that. What do you think inside the parks would make it a more welcoming place to the average, Black family? Or is it as simple as like the more representation of people that look like them, the better chance they have of wanting to feel welcome and coming in?
So the question is, what can Disney do to make sure people feel...
in the parks, beyond just like funds and initiatives and that sort of stuff? Is there anything theme park wise?
I think what's weird, and I think the question kind of lies in, how people feel included in the parks. And I think that's kind of like one of the big like things that pushes people away is, people want to see people who look like them, not just walking around the parks, but in the parks. and I don't think Tiana is enough. And that, and I think that's kind of always bothered me, because they go, well, we got Disney Princess, we have Tiana, which is great. It's like, finally we get a black woman that's a Disney princess. And so, as a male, I want to see like a Disney prince, and there is none. Naveen is not black, or they'll deny it up and down that he is not black, so that sucks. And a lot of the black characters don't exist in Disney other than Frozone. And you can't hardly see his face. I mean, there was it Wasabi from Big Hero 6, and you don't ever see him in the parks. You don't see a lot of blacks in the parks. Oh, there's Galaxy's Edge now. There's one, so that's 3 characters that are black that you see regularly in the parks. And then you have the band that plays in the African section of Animal Kingdom. But I want characters, you know what I mean? I shouldn't have to go to Animal Kingdom to Africa to see African Americans.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make me feel welcome. So I think it kind of starts at the ground level, not to say, hey, we have parks and we have these people, come on in. This has to do more, rather than, hey, we have a black character. Now we're going to turn him into a ghost. Like, I want to see a black character from the beginning of the movie to the end of the movie. And you have them. I just want to see more of them. And it doesn't exist. And so that's the thing that kind of keeps a lot of people away, because, they want to take their kids to the gift shop and they want to buy their kids toys of, characters that they can associate with. And for a lot of black families, if they're buying, they can buy Tiana, but what about the black boys? The black kids? They gonna go home with a Frozone toy? Sure, that's cool. When you have so many different characters that you can choose from, but then they end up just buying like, I don't know, Peter Pan, and then be like, this is okay. It doesn't really build that diversity that they want. You know what I mean? Like kids really like that. Kids really like having toys of people that they can relate to. Like even when you look at like the new line of Barbies, you have Barbies of different sizes, different shapes, different afflictions. They had one that like was missing a leg, one that sits in a wheelchair. People want that type of representation. And I think even so, like in Disney, that representation goes a long way, and it's not there.
Yeah. On a sort of ending note, something a little different, as we finish up here, I'm curious about your artistic future. What are your hopes? Maybe it's vlogging, maybe it's other stuff, but what are your goals? What do you want to see for the future of what you do?
Oh, man. The only way I can say that is to keep it simple. My only goal for YouTube is to earn the respect of my peers. And that says a lot. It doesn't really mean like, artistically things change or things, evolve. It's what I really want. And I think I kind of like grown a lot past of the idea of like, I want 10,000 subscribers, or I want 100,000 subscribers, or I want to make this a full-time gig. I think those are all really good plans, but I think they are not realistic to me at this time. Not saying that they are realistic. They very much are realistic. But it's more realistic to say, you know what, I'm going to start little. And I think the biggest thing for me is, what I want out of my channel is to find my place in a community where I felt like I had no place. And so it's just kind of like that earning of a respect that I feel I've earned. And I think, and it probably sounds like very like cocky and like egomaniac or whatever. I don't know how it sounds. I don't know how this is going to come out, honestly. But I really, truly feel like what I really, truly want is that. You know what I mean? And like when I look at it, when people go, well, what do you want out of YouTube? What do you want? I want the respect of everyone of my peers that do the same thing in the channel. You know what I mean? And it's like, I don't know if I've earned it. I don't know if I gained it. I don't know if I have it, but that's what I want. You know what I mean? And it's like, you work really hard at trying to maintain like, respect, as far as like, maybe you want respect as a podcaster through other networks, or maybe, you're a blogger and you want your site to be respected by other blogging sites, rather than them being like, oh, well, they're like Fox News or something like that. I don't know. Fox News could be respected by other channels. I get that. Right. But I'm not like, I don't want to be looked at like he's not respected. You know what I mean? It's like he makes content that is true and it's real. May not be something that I like, but I respect the stuff that he throws out because I can never do it. And that's my goal. That is kind of my big driving focus on how I put out my content. So it'll evolve and it'll change because eventually it's doing things that I find is interesting and what I find I like. But at the end of the day, I want all my peers to respect what I do rather than to not respect me.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to respect my work. Now I want everybody to respect it. So I don't know. Again, that probably comes off very egotistical or, narcissistic. I think I've kind of grown past the idea of like, man, I'm going to have 1 million views and 1 million subscribers. Boy, it's going to go crazy, and I think it's beyond that. It's like what I really want is to feel respected and to feel a part of a community where, you may not feel very a part of because of maybe how you look or maybe your race. So,
Sean Rosell, thank you so much for coming on Dreamfinders. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
And that's it for this episode of Dreamfinders. Thanks so much to Sean Rosell for talking with me, and you can check out all his videos over on YouTube. Simply search Sean Rosell. That's Sean, Rosell. Dreamfinders is edited by Shannon Mickelson and quality control by Ben Harris. It's hosted and produced by yours truly, Nathan Hartman, who you can follow on Twitter at SomeStuffISaid. Our podcast artwork is provided by JP Tanner. Find his other work at tanwoodcreative.com. This podcast is distributed by WDW News Today, the worldwide leader in Disney Parks news. Read all they have to offer at WDWNT.com. Tell your friends about the show, and please give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It means a lot. Also, if someone you know would make a great guest on this program, feel free to email us at dreamfinders@WDWNT.com. I'm Nathan Hartman, and remember, if we can dream it, then we can do it.